And welcome to the Speak for Yourself podcast. My name is Casey, and I'm so glad that you're here. I have a very special guest tonight, and I am super excited for this conversation. Let's get him on. Mr. Kyle Seraphin, how are you?
I'm doing well. How you doing, buddy? I got a feedback loop, so I got to figure out where it is.
Okay. Yeah.
There, I think we found it.
Awesome. Test 1, 2. You good?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Sweet, buddy. Hey, so I have heard you. My first introduction to you was on Clint Russell's podcast, Liberty Lockdown, and so that's really where I found you. And then I've heard you on maybe 2 or 3 Twitter Spaces since, and I really dig your personal story. And I'm excited to be able to share that with my audience tonight. So I guess let's just start from the beginning. We're nearly at the I guess the 1 year mark, maybe a month short from that. Is that correct?
We're actually
where all this started.
Just over, probably just over a year now. So April 18th is when I got walked out. But all this actually began somewhere in September or October of 2021. So we're actually a little bit past all of that year mark,
Okay.
maybe coming up on a year and a half.
Okay. Well, I guess let's start from the beginning. What did you run across that made you want to, for lack of a better term, whistleblow?
Yeah, I never thought of myself as doing that. I just thought I was letting Congress know something that needed to be, checked over, that there was some oversight opportunities that needed to be explored. In September of 2021, this is right after the Biden administration pushed out a COVID mandate, said that every federal employee must get the COVID vaccination by November of that year. And I was one of the first people in line letting the Bureau know that I was not going to be doing that. So I was working for the FBI. I had about 6 years in at that point, 5.5 years in. And I filled out a religious accommodation request, which is kind of funny. People think that you're putting in something that says, please accommodate my religion. I didn't write it that way. I said, I'm not going to be getting this. So if you can accommodate, be great. And if not, your move kind of deal. Yeah. And so I promptly got an email back that said, yes, your application has been received and we will consider it. And they considered it till forever because they've never gotten back to me about that. That's kind of funny. And about a couple of weeks after that, and I follow the news religiously, so I knew, I always know when Chris Wray is testifying in front of Congress, whether he's in front of the House or the Senate. I knew when the Attorney General was doing the same thing. Those are kind of the bosses when you work for DOJ, when you work for the FBI. So I'm following these sort of things. I catch all the highlights, and I caught all the highlights of Merrick Garland telling. Now I can't think of who the congressman was. It was in front of the Senate, if my memory serves. Maybe Josh Hawley. But in any case, he gets out in front of the Senate, and he says basically that they are not going to be doing surveillance of parents, and they're not going to be using counterterrorism resources for people that are rowdy at school board meetings. And I heard him plain as day say he was not going to be using Patriot Act tools and things like that. And so theoretically, that's a policy statement that goes down to all of DOJ and including the FBI. But in October, I get this email forwarded to me. It wasn't actually sent to me in the first place. I actually got forwarded from one of my colleagues. And it is from the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism, a guy named Carlton Peoples, who essentially said exactly what we just said the Attorney General said they wouldn't do, which is that they were going to be evaluating parents at school board meetings, that they were going to be engaging and using a threat tag. This was the threat tag EDU officials, I believe, was the actual tag. It's like a hashtag. It kind of tells you, where the information is. So if you were to go search it, you find all the things that were hashtagged or threat tagged with this particular thing. And it's coming from the counterterrorism division. So I printed out the email, and 5 days later, I'm in my congresswoman's office in New Mexico in the 2nd District, and I bring it to Yvette Harrell, and I hand it off to her. And I say, this is a problem. And by the way, I got a whole bunch of other problems that I want to let you know about. And I let them know about all kinds of things, like some of the stuff that was going on in the Afghan refugee camps, which are actually more accurately I guess they're called parolees. The State Department had their own weird name for them. And I let them know about some stuff about FISA 702, which some people will know as being a sort of one of the domestic surveillance tools that the FBI has and the NSA uses. So I brought all this stuff to them. And then I went away. And then a couple of days later, I'm walking through the office and my boss is saying something. And he goes, have they told you what they're going to do about the COVID shot? And I said, no. And he goes, you're a whistleblower though, right? And I had just finished taking the training where they basically tell you that nobody can ask you if you're a whistleblower. They can't really come after you for it. And so I've got this boss, and one of the reasons you get fired at the FBI is if you lie to somebody. It's called lack of candor. And so, he asked me a question point blank, and I'm pretty sure he can't ask me the question, but I just tell him, I go, yeah. And he goes, yeah, I thought so. Something like that. And that was the end of that conversation. And I went like, well, that was fast. Like
it's like a catch-22 question.
Exactly right. They obviously knew exactly that I printed this thing out. So now I'm in this really bizarre space where my boss kind of knows I'm not going to get the shot. And then November 22nd rolls around. That was the deadline. The 23rd, I go into the office, and I actually started my day off really, really early because somebody was either killed or died at a federal prison. And I got called out of bed at like 3 a.m. So I respond with one of the, you know what an FNG is?
No, sir, I don't.
The effing new guy.
Oh, yeah.
The new guy comes out of Quantico. He's 3-4 months out, and they go, hey, will you go with him because there's a death investigation and we're going to find out if there was a homicide at the prison. So I said, sure. So I roll out of bed at 3 a.m. and I drive down to the prison with him, and we do 12 hours worth of interviews of every guard and every inmate who might have seen anything in the COVID isolation ward of all places. Then I get back to the office. My boss said, you don't get a COVID swab if you're not taking the test every 72 hours, and you got to have one before you come back in from Thanksgiving. Then I had to kick you out of the office. And I said, well, that's fine. I'm not going to swab my nose every 72 hours. That's not happening. I said, I got a top secret clearance. I've been a paramedic for a decade. I got plenty of sick leave. If I'm sick, I'll stay home. You can count on me for that. I'm definitely trustworthy enough for that thing. And I'm pretty good at deciding, whether or not I'm going to be appropriate to work in the middle of the so-called pandemic that was going on. Anyway, so he says, well, you got to do this. So after Thanksgiving, I show up on that Monday, whatever it was, the 26th, 27th, something like that. And he kicks me out of the office. But we first had like a 4-hour conversation in his office, just sitting and talking about, just kind of chewing the fat, and him telling me that he's going to have to send me home, and, he'd let me take my personal leave. So that's how it all got started. And then it just went downhill from there. I ended up getting put on AWOL for not taking these nasal swabs. And then they ended up letting me come back in because they changed the rules. Go figure. The same thing we saw all the way through COVID. And then end of the day, they come in on April 18th out of the blue, minutes after I had just finished a equal opportunity complaint that I had done. And so I did like a 3-hour interview with this investigator from the headquarters unit, telling him all the things I thought were discriminatory. And then they walked me out, take the badge, take the gun. And that was the last time I was in the, in the gun carrying business of the FBI. So just over a year ago now.
I want to ask, I know that you were in the Air Force. Is that correct? Before the FBI?
Mm-hmm.
Can you do, just so if the audience doesn't know who you are already, can you do kind of a brief summation of, who you are and what you've done prior to the FBI?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I took a circuitous route to get to the FBI. I joined when I was 35, which is about 10 years later than a lot of people do. So long and short, I went to the University of Oklahoma. I spent 5 years there instead of 4 because I'm one of those kind of smart guys that doesn't know how to stay in class and do my work, and spent extra time there. I think I had like 50 extra credit hours that I needed to actually.
What do they call that? A lap year?
Yeah, it was bad. I ended it wearing a blazer much like this with a full mohawk, and just shaved my head. And it was just like, that's how dumb I am right now. Everything is stupid. I can't believe I'm still here. But I got a lot of interesting experience. Some of the stuff that I didn't know I was going to be involved in was really helpful. I took some time to be a teaching assistant, and I worked for one of the professors there and did American federal government, which has actually been really helpful in kind of what I deal with now. So I get out of there. I moved to San Francisco. I sell ergonomic office furniture for a little bit. I worked for a radio station. In fact, I worked for the radio station that my dad used to run the year I was born. So that's kind of weird. And then I ended up going and working for Dell Computers. I moved back to Texas. That was probably my 3rd or 4th move back to Texas at that point. And
place to be, man.
I'm on move number 7. I just moved back here. It's my 7th move back to Texas. So that was my 4th probably. So I sell some Dell computers. I end up leaving the state. I go up to Kansas. I run a restaurant for a little bit of time. I move out to San Diego, and I'm like a couch surfing bum trying to figure out what my life is about. And then I get a job at Warner Brothers Movies. And so I worked for the movie studio for about 18 months, something like that, right around there. And I was doing financial analysis, which is bizarre because I don't have a background in that, but I'm pretty good with math. So I'm doing like linear and curve regressions and stuff. And I'm trying to help them, do revenue recognition programs, and all that made sense from what I was doing. But yeah, what the heck was I doing there? And during that time, I was going, hey, I'm 26 at the time. I'm about to turn 27. I'm looking down the barrel of like, what in the heck am I doing? Am I going to do this for a long time? I'm not creating anything. I'm not destroying anything. So I start talking to different military recruiters, and I'd always kind of had a bug, an interest in it. Never was something really encouraged in my family. And I end up getting a SEAL contract, and that doesn't make a lot of sense when I find out that if I get injured, I'm screwed. And I'm 27. I'm way too old to be, screwing around with it like some of these guys, and then go back to the fleet and chip, paint on a battleship. So I ended up getting a really favorable contract with the Air Force to go into special operations work. And I sit down with this operator who's, steely eyed and probably 6'1" and 220, and he's got like neck tattoos, and he's got these like crazy blue eyes, like looking right through me. And he just goes, "Do you want to save lives, or do you want to harvest souls?"
Oh my God.
And you're like,
what a line.
Yeah. And I don't think he was playing. I think that's the way he thought about things.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I want to harvest souls, obviously. Like what 27-year-old dude who's leaving finance who doesn't want to do that? So I go into the Air Force to be a combat controller, which is a kind of a special operations air liaison, attaches to different special operations groups and, calls and airstrikes and stuff like that. So that was the goal. I make it through almost all the training. It's about 18 months of it. And then I just about die at Fort Bragg. I end up with a, rectal body temp of 106. I'm heat stroked out, and I'm a total disaster. And so rhabdomyolysis, and, I'm like urine looking like maple syrup. And I thought I was going to die. I was pretty sure I was going to die, actually. And so all that got kind of, they pull me out, they do a medical exam. They tell me, you can do anything else in the Air Force, you can't come back to this one. Your spot's gone. So what do you want to do? And so I said, well, I guess I'll go to the other one. I guess I'll go save lives. So I go to pararescue, which is another kind of specialty niche in the Air Force a lot of people are not familiar with. And so I go through the NDOC, which is the sort of the selection course. And I make it all the way through the end of that thing. And then I end up just waiting around for this free fall spot. And in the meantime, I'm 31 years old, and I'm living with a 19-year-old roommate who refuses to buy toilet paper and, has like a $900 a month cheap payment and all the other kind of dumb stuff that happens when you're an enlisted guy who's, a grown up and living with a bunch of younger guys. So, so I got fed up with that. I just told him, I'm like, look, if you're not going to send me off to go do free fall school, then I'm not sticking around. And they said, well, we don't really care what happens. So I ended up putting in my resignation there, and I just kind of walked out on my own 2 feet and looked around and went, what in the heck am I going to do? I'm this like dive qualified, airborne qualified paramedic who has an air traffic control certificate. Like, am I going to go to be something in the civilian world like that? And so I ended up doing riding on an ambulance for about a year. I worked in a hospital for about another year after that. I went to school, and I thought I was going to go to med school. And in the meantime, I dropped into this application for the FBI. And in 2016, I get the word that, there's a whole series of interviews and stuff like that, but they all kind of moved to the point where I go and do an interview in, it was probably in the end of 2015, maybe October 2015. I go into New York City and go to Federal Plaza there and did my interview and get the offer letter a couple days later, and then just stuck around. In 2016, went to Quantico, and the rest was history until now, which is another weird step because now I'm out of that too.
So was that application kind of on a whim, or was that something you had always considered?
It's goofy because I had always considered it. I always thought I was going to go there. In fact, it was one of the reasons why I joined the military, because I have this uncle who was he retired as a GS-15, which is top of the regular government pay scale. And I hit him up and I said, I'd kind of like to go and do something in the FBI, maybe one of the tactical teams or something, which I almost went and tried out for, except COVID kind of ruined that. But I was all spun up for it. And he goes, well, do you speak another language? I said, no. He goes, are you a computer programmer? I go, no. And he goes, are you an attorney? I said, no. An accountant? No. So we go down all the list, and it's like, you're none of the things that they want. So you better be a military veteran. And that's the only way you're going to get hired on to do this. And so that's what I ended up doing. With kind of a long eye that I might go to the FBI, but you throw it in and then you don't hear anything for a year. So, nobody thinks twice about it until then they call you up and say, hey, go take our test. And then they tell you, well, we'll call you if we ever feel like it, and then it's a really off-putting application process. At least it was.
I bet. Yeah.
They didn't care at all. It took probably 2 years and change to get it done.
Yeah. I probably would have forgot that I had applied if a year had gone by and I hadn't heard anything.
Oh, I definitely did. Yeah, there was no. I mean, actually, my wife and I had made this plan. We were going to move to Vermont, and we were going to like buy an old house and refinish it and make a bed and breakfast. That was like our plan. And so we literally like rented out our place in Austin. We had this condo that we lived in, and so we moved all of our stuff into the storage unit that we owned that was across the hallway, and rented it out to some hipster kids. And then we like hit the road. We were going to go up there and find some house in Vermont. And the first day we were in Vermont, my wife hated it. She absolutely hated the city we went to, and she was like, "No." And it's like, well, now what?
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing? And the FBI called us as we were packing our car to start driving up to Vermont. So it became kind of the backup plan. And I guess the long eye plan.
This is kind of going to go off subject of where I want to stay most of the conversation, but to me, I know that you are a Catholic. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Does that sound like a God thing to you, as far as the timing of how all of that happened? And
it's all that. It's 100% that. The funny thing is this: I used to think that I was driving the train. You pick your destiny. You have free will, and you make all the choices. And I'm 41 now, and if you had laid out the plan as what's happened in the last 18 months, first of all, there's no reason I should be on my feet, that I should be financially solvent, that I should be sane. I should be crushed. That's what happens to people who do what I did. That's what happens to people that the FBI decides to go after. That's what happens to people who work for the FBI that get thrown out of it. They get leveled. They get steamrolled. And so I keep telling these people, when it comes to the question about, is God in charge? It's like, yeah, what I kind of see is my metaphor is that I realize that I'm on the train, but I'm not the conductor. I'm just a guy in the boxcar somewhere. And my job is just keep the kids from falling out the windows. We just hold on tight and see where the train goes, because I don't even know where the tracks are going at this point. And I'm just, things come up and people say, "Hey, you want to do this?" I go, "Sure." And, they say, "Hey, will you talk to this person?" Yes. I've met people. It's been dead ends and a lot of closed doors and strange things and, contacts that I have no business meeting. I had a congressman get on a private jet and fly down and meet me at a hangar and talk to me for 2 hours. Like, who does that?
Yeah.
Like,
what a strange,
pitch me like a business idea that didn't make any sense at the end of it, but for him, but he flew in there anyway to talk to me, which is amazing and bizarre. I've had a senator call me while I was on the toilet. I couldn't take the call, and I looked down. It's like, oh my God, what is going on here? So all that is bizarre. I ended up on a bunch of different national television shows. I've had weeks where I've been on national media, 25 times. Everything from 3-minute hits on Tucker Carlson to 90-minute podcasts. It's totally bizarre. And I've got my phone list is my phone is just full of reporters that do national stories and journalists and TV personalities that just have hit me up on a regular basis, and people like Dan Bongino, who are really good guys that have really kind of kept track of me and made sure I didn't fall off and die, which is it's really amazing. So there's no question about it. I mean, there's a providence. You can call it whatever you want, but God's hand in the world is pretty obvious to me when I'm doing this, because like I say, I should be stomped on like a bug, and like I'm standing pretty okay right now. We got another kid on the way.
That's awesome.
Yeah, life's pretty good.
How many kids do you have?
I got 3 right now, and I got another one coming. So we just found out we're gonna have a daughter.
Oh, congratulations. That's
means
awesome.
I have more sins to pay for, is what it means, Casey.
Yeah.
Because I got 2 girls already. So I got 18 more years of emotion starting not yet.
Oh man. I have a 18-month-old. That's been a wild ride so far.
Oh yeah. Boy or girl?
He's a boy. Yeah.
Yep. I got a 2-year-old right now. So I'm seeing that same thing. My son is 2. And
yeah, he's starting to get into those, I won't call them terrible twos, but they can't control their emotions, or they don't know how to manage them. So,
yep.
They're just throwing tantrums, and, it's tantrum one second, and then it's, they're off doing their thing the other second.
Giggling, and
complete 180.
Yeah, mine's fascinated right now with catching flies, and he does it with his bare hands, and he catches them. He's really, really good at it. And it's really unsettling, because you'll look over and he'll go, "Dad, catching flies." And I'm like, "Yeah, dude, I got it." And then I look over and he's like, "Keeping the fly warm." And I'm like, "No, you're pinching a fly to death." Okay, whatever. I'll just get them all, buddy.
That is a fast kid if he can catch flies.
He caught 2, one in each hand the other day. As I knocked my mic, he literally had 1 fly here and he caught the other fly. And so he's got 2 flies in his hand. And I'm like, and there's a 3rd fly. He's like, "Another fly." And I'm like, "Dude, you got 2 hands. You're like a dog with 2 balls in your mouth. You're done. That's it." He's
That's
like,
like
Dad,
those
Dad,
that's
you
like
hold the
those
flies.
martial arts movies where the apprentice meets the master and the master just snatches one out of the air.
That's right. Yeah, no, he's doing it on his own. I can't catch the fly. I have no ability to do that. It's bizarre, but good for him, I guess. Maybe he's got a future. You know, I hope he's not like a pest control dude per se, but
Yeah, yeah.
he's got some high speed skills to catch these little buzzing critters all over the place. And he's not even wearing pants. He's running around, potty training and all that stuff. It's just
Yeah.
it's hilarious.
It's a great age, man. I'm
Mhm.
loving it so far. So kind of back to the FBI. You were a counterintelligence operations. You did that for 2 years, and then you went to specialty surveillance team.
That's
Can you
right.
speak to a little bit of both of those jobs and what you did within them?
Yeah, so the counterintelligence game is awful. It's like the most indoor dog thing that you can do. It's really not fun. Particularly, I was an outdoor guy. I was doing, 8 to 12 hours working out a day when I was working in the military. Like everything was just physically crushing. And then I went into an ambulance, and that's a pretty physical job. It's a lot of sitting, and then you got to go and move around, but you're constantly moving gear and stuff like that.
I was
And
a
then
firefighter for 4 years and an EMT basic, and we had the ambulance service as well that was under our jurisdiction. So I know a little bit of what you're going through on
it's a
the
lot of waiting, right? Like you're just kind of
yeah.
sitting around going like, all right, or you're a lot of driving, but then when it gets wild, then like it's really wild.
Yep.
And you can make an hour disappear in
It's
2 minutes.
0 to 100 just like
Exactly right.
that. Yep.
So, I did that, and then you go and do this you go and do this CI job is what we call it, and you're sitting there and you're looking at FISA and you're looking at just reporting, you're reading analysis, and it's really, really boring. It's mostly indoors. It's mostly, just looking at it. A lot of the subjects we had were not US based. So we were doing, watching spies that never came to the United States and just trying to see what they were doing. And I'd go, well, what's the end result? And they'd go, well, then we know what they're up to. It's like, but what are we going to do about it? And they're like, we're going to know more things. I don't want to do that. Like, how do I get out of this? And they're like, you can't, you're here forever. It's like, oh, I'm going to resign. That's what's going to happen next. In fact, I sat down with my boss, who is an awful human being, and just like one of the worst people I've ever met. Her name is Aubrey Schwartz. So for whatever that's worth. And so I'm sitting here.
Shout out.
She was a liar, and she was just a rotten human. And so she's like, I want to talk to you about, where you see yourself in the Bureau in 5 years. And I'm like, I see myself on any other squad except this. And she was like, well, what do you mean? I was like, because in like 9 months, I'm going to resign. I'm not going to do this. Like in June, I'm going to be out of here. And sure enough, in June, just before June, I ended up getting the paperwork to transfer over to the surveillance squad. So I saw a lot of abuses of what the Bureau does, but I didn't really know what they were, because you're just kind of figuring it out. You're like, what is it that we're doing? Why are we trying to do this? How are we using these tools? And then you start learning more about what those tools are. And one of them is FISA 702. So the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is known as FISA. And there's all these different parts to it. But 702 basically allows the federal government to essentially spy on or collect on you, is more accurately described. And that means like anything digital, email, text messages, if they go over US wires, if they're unencrypted, stuff like that, Skype calls, stuff like that. And they can grab all of that, but they have to have an authorized purpose. And the purpose is they have to be actually not looking for you. They have to be looking for someone who is a legitimate foreign intelligence subject, someone tied to a foreign, intelligence service. And that person has to be not in the United States. So if you're emailing with like a Chinese spy, for example, then they would have an authorized reason to look at you. But if they went looking for you specifically, it's called reverse targeting, and that's illegal. And that's the only way that I know how that tool is used. I always tell people, it's kind of like, imagine if the TSA was given a metal detector and their job was make sure no, metal knives or guns get on the plane. And everybody has to go through the metal detector, but you're not allowed to use the metal detector specifically to look for weapons, even though that's your job. You know what I mean? Like that's,
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell immediately how ridiculous that is. And that's essentially how that tool is used. So you start realizing that it's like, I don't want anything to do with this. I asked some questions. I didn't understand what we were even doing at the point. And so they moved me to the surveillance squad, which was okay. And that was fun. Like surveillance is the most old school FBI thing to do. You're running down bad guys. You get a taste of all the different subjects. We had white collar cases. We had gang cases. We had human trafficking cases. We had some counterintelligence. We had a lot of counterterrorism cases. And then my team, because we were based out of Washington, D.C., was kind of like de facto national surveillance asset. So they would fly us around. I did this 20 times where we would go for 2 weeks and watch whatever the priority case was in some other state, some other field office's jurisdiction. And that became really fun. The first 2 weeks I'm on the squad. So I get transferred over. I've been indoors, just reading FISA. And then I get to the new squad. And 2 weeks later, they put me on a plane and fly me to Alaska to go watch a guy in Anchorage. And you're like, wow. Oh, this is way better. And then I drove around in the, this beautiful area about an hour outside of Anchorage where this guy was, and he was supposedly a white supremacist. And all he did was, go hiking and stuff. So it wasn't that big of a deal. But we're sitting over there and I look over at a tree and there's like 2 bald eagles looking at me. And I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like, this is really good. And then I made the mistake of eating caribou, which if you're not well suited.
Never had it.
Well, it's a gamble. So I go to this restaurant and I order this caribou burger. I'm like, oh, reindeer sounds really interesting. I don't know. And and all the waiters were Russian for some reason. And this guy comes up and he's like, I have yak burger. And you're like, a yak burger? I didn't order a yak burger. I've seen those. Those look awful. And I'm like, I had a caribou burger. And he's like, same thing. He throws it down. And I was like, oh, is it though? It doesn't seem like the same thing. And I ate it and I just ended up on the toilet all night. Just like every 30 minutes, I'm just like hugging the bowl, just destroyed. And then I got to sit in the car for, 8 hours the next day, just drinking Gatorade and praying that I'm not going to be destroyed.
But did it taste good?
I don't know. I actually don't know. And then I was stupid enough. I tried a sausage like 2 days later and I had the same exact problem. So I don't think it agrees with me, but hey, you know what? It's a life lesson. And it was an experience. I'll always remember the fact that I was throwing up and leaking out of both ends, and the sun didn't go down. So that was a really surreal feeling too, because it's the summer in Alaska, right? So you're looking out and you're like, it's 2 a.m. and it looks kind of like 6 a.m. in Texas. It's really, really, really unsettling. And then it got dark for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Totally bizarre. You look over and I went and saw one of my Quantico classmates while I was there. And she lived there with her husband. They're super nice people. So I go and I sit down with her, and I think I met her at like 6 or 7 o'clock, and we sit down and we're eating, and I look out the window and you look at, what you expect the sun in the sky means. And I'm like, oh, it's probably like 6 or 7 o'clock. It was 11:30 at night. We've just been sitting there and I got a 6 a.m. flight kind of thing. And you're like, oh God, how did that happen? It's really, really
That's
weird.
Trippy. Yeah.
If you're not used to it, it's too much.
But. So it kind of seems like the people that you surveilled, there might've been some legitimate cases and then some that were not so legitimate.
Mixed bag.
Can you give kind of an example of both?
Yeah, sure. So, legitimate case, we did a lot of MS-13. Those guys are scumbags. They're rotten, moving around young girls and trafficking them, which is to say, sort of pimping them out and using them for sex trafficking. And that's awful. So, that's a really legit case. There's another one we did where we were sitting in the middle of Washington, D.C. with a van where we had cameras on it. And then we were running around the corner. We're watching the cameras and we're counting the number of adult males going in and out of this underage, like, strip club brothel thing. And SWAT team goes in and takes those guys down on a Friday or a Saturday night and grabs a bunch of dudes and throws them in cuffs, and they're out there abusing little girls. So that's pretty legit. Plenty of white collar cases that seem pretty legit, guys that had defrauded people of significant money, 7 figures plus 8 figures. So those are always interesting. And then 1 or 2 legit jihadi type cases where people have sworn allegiance to ISIS and they're taking actions that seem like they're going to be engaged in some sort of terroristic activity. Seems legit. Some of them have never been taken down. Some of them are still active subjects, I'm sure. We had a couple of them that got real weird. I had a guy that's he'd been under surveillance, I think, since he was in his late teens or early 20s, and he was in his mid 30s by the time we go there. I think they've been watching him for 15 years or something crazy, off and on. They don't watch him all the time, right? And so you're watching this guy, and then they did a search warrant on him, which is always a dead tip off that the FBI is watching you when FBI agents come into your house and like look through your stuff. And so we had this deal with the search team. We're like, look, we're not going to be just, bugging on the guy, but whenever you release the house and release him and release his car, because they had a search warrant for the vehicle, let us know, because we're just going to be hanging out in a parking lot, and then we'll get into position again and you can release him. And so they didn't do that. They just let him go, because that's what always happens. Like, the K squad just doesn't care about the surveillance thing. So one of them calls us up and they go, hey, do you got him? And we go, like, what do you mean, do we got him? It's like, we let him go 12 minutes ago. And you're like, oh my God. So we looked down and we had a tracker on the vehicle, and the dude is bugging out fast, really fast. So me and a couple of guys scrambled really quickly. You know, I'm doing 90 to 100 miles an hour on 35-mile-an-hour surface streets, like running the back roads. And the guy is driving basically right to my house. And not that he knew where I lived, but he was driving right to my house. And, you know, he's pretty hopped up because he just had the FBI come through his door. So God knows what he's going to do. Is he going to go blow up his car somewhere? You know, he ends up going to a Taco Bell less than a mile from my home, right on my road, ditches his car, jumps in another vehicle. And we lost him behind a tree. We had a plane that was up, I think, following him at the time. And like nobody could tell where he was. We called the plane in, like they actually launched to follow him. And so we're looking around, car's still there. Maybe he's inside, maybe he's not. So we send somebody in, sweep the restaurant. He's not there. He's gone. He jumped in another vehicle, disappeared. So he's gone for 3-4 days. No idea where he went. And we're looking around. They're holding the house, trying to figure out what happens to him. The guy shows up on a Sunday morning driving like 15 miles an hour next to some federal buildings with his brother. I don't know where he was, but we follow him, you know, overtly. They know because there's nobody else on the road at 5 a.m. in this little area, and followed him to his house, pick him up. Guy comes out of his house wearing his Amazon. He was working for Amazon at the time, which is great. And he was doing package delivery. So nothing wrong there, right? Nothing bad could ever happen to a dude who's like got access to a van and packages. It's so bad. So we're following him to work, and he actually pulls into this parking lot and like chases me down. Actually, at one point in time, he like follows me in. I'm the only vehicle in the parking lot, and I was breaking off to leave, and he follows me in. I had another agent follow me in, and he decided not to engage. But I mean, I'm locked and loaded, rifle on. I throw my body armor on. I have no idea what this dude's going to do, but he's completely erratic. We followed him to work. They told us to let him do his job and leave him alone. He got into another vehicle and disappeared. He bought some tickets on a bus. He took a bus from Washington, D.C. area, out of Virginia, and made it down to Georgia. Took a bus from Georgia to Mexico City, from Mexico City down to Panama, and then was trying to hop on a flight to fly to Marrakesh to go join up with some, like, I don't know, jihadi fighters overseas. But because the flight was going to fly over U.S. airspace in Florida, and he was on the no-fly list, he gets kicked off. The Panamanians kick him out. They kick him to like Guatemala. Guatemalans kick him out to Mexico. Mexicans kick him back to Dallas airports. And we pick him back up at the airport, and we're like, okay, so now we've got him. So some of these guys, you know, they do some pretty wild stuff, and you go like, that's a pretty legit case. Like someone should be watching him. I don't know what he was doing. Yeah. It's not good. I mean, they had some intelligence that he was going to do something shady. No arrest. As far as I know, he's probably still out there in the world doing his thing, which is crazy. He knows who he was too. Gosh. It's not like it was going to be a secret to him, you know, when he found out he was on the no-fly list, and he knew he was being surveilled by, you know, people. So that's bizarre. And then you have, you know, some guys that are supposedly white supremacists, and they're 21-year-old kids that are wearing loafers and, you know, khaki pants and a polo shirt, and, you know, they're saying racist stuff on Reddit at a Starbucks, and you're watching them and you're going, I don't think this is what I signed up for exactly. And it's a mixed bag. There's a bunch of that too, you know? So there's a bunch of sort of terrorism cases that go nowhere, and they seem to be very inflated, and they seem to be very disingenuous. And some of them seem really legit. So the joke is every time a case agent said, like, maybe we should put surveillance on a subject, you know, basically like this, like Claxton went off like the Ghostbusters alarm in our hangar. And so we would all scramble like it was the biggest thing ever. And it might have been the guy who'd been like, I haven't done anything on this case for a while. I'll throw it over to the surveillance guys. But we never got that brief. They never were like, hey, we don't really care. Go do this thing for us so that we can write paper. They always had to act like it was a big deal. So we always acted like it was a big deal.
So what kind of a duration of time would each case be? Is that just like an individual case-by-case thing, or was there a set duration of time that you're surveilling someone, that sort of thing?
So we would do shifts. You know, there's a specific length of time that you'd be doing it. You'd go grab them in the mornings or the afternoons. We'd be sort of mission focused. So sometimes they'd say, hey, find out where this guy goes to work. Like, where is he at during the day? You know, and when does he leave the house? And so that would be a specific thing that a case agent would want to know. And then they might try to figure out, okay, is he working a job? Is he working illegally? Is he going to the gang hangout? You know, what's going on there? If it's like a doctor, like doing a pill mill, does he drop off pills, you know, illegal prescriptions somewhere in the parking lot? Is he doing them at another location? So there's always like kind of a mission set, we'd always ask them, like, what do you hope to gain from the surveillance? And then that kind of dictated how much time you would spend with them. And we wouldn't do every single day unless they told us we had to do that. Sometimes for the counterterrorism stuff, you don't have a choice. It's like, don't let this guy out of your sight no matter what. And then that's what you're doing for the next couple of weeks until they either figure out what to do with them or they decide that he's not actually the same kind of threat. It's always guys in the counterterrorism space, and 99.999% of the time. So you're out there trying to run down, make sure that sometimes it's just babysitting to make sure somebody doesn't do something violent, which is not super exciting, but you got to tune in every day, because if there are people that show up on surveillance, it's one of the few places in the FBI's daily operations where people have the potential of being very, very badly hurt if they screw up. And it's pretty easy to get lax and relaxed and not paying attention when you're on the street. And all the things can happen. Somebody from your case could show up, or some guy could just decide to carjack you because you've been sitting in a car and the engine's running and he decided this is a good day to, go take a vehicle that's 3 years old and looks okay to take. So I've had people try to jump in my vehicle while I was on surveillance. That's bizarre. More bizarre for them. But
yeah, I imagine they get quite the surprise.
Yeah. Looking down the barrel of a Glock, when the window rolls down and you're trying to open up the handle is always one way to do it. But, don't try to steal cars. It's not a good move.
Yep,
it could have a negative outcome for you.
Well, so one of the things that struck me as interesting when you went on Clint's podcast was just how slow some of the wheels of government turn. And one of the things that you mentioned, I can't remember what it was exactly. Maybe it was a driver's license or something like that. You requested this, and you got it back, like you said, like 6 months or something like that had gone by before you got it back.
Yeah, you can never forget something like that. So this is coming out of the FISA world. This is out of secret surveillance stuff. And I'd gotten a document. I thought, like, oh, this looks interesting. I wonder what it is. I'll send it over for translation services. So you put it into the special request, you fill out what you want and so on. And then, 6 months later, somebody goes, it's a driver's license. And I'm like, what's a driver's license? And they're like, that request you made. I'm like, what request? I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, you've moved on with your life. You could have had a baby and then and been on paternity leave for 3 months and come back and find out that they found out it was a driver's license. It's like, I don't care. Like, that's no longer relevant. Like, whatever you thought it was, it doesn't matter. So yeah, some of the stuff is just comically stupid. And,
that's wild, because you would think in intelligence that it like promptness would be key in that situation.
You would think that. Yeah. So here's a sort of a good example of how ridiculous it is. When the Washington field office shut down for COVID, which they did, they shut down for most of 2020 and a lot of 2021 as well. And they were letting agents come in for 30 minutes a day, 2 times a week. So 3 days a week, they didn't show up. And 2 days a week, they worked for 30 minutes. Okay. So that's the case. And so this is going on in the national security sphere, which is to say the counterintelligence and the counterterrorism. Maybe 150 agents in each one of those, up to probably 300 agents or so that are doing this kind of work. And what they did is there's 150 or so, maybe 150 doing counterintelligence. And so they've got all the threat countries you'd think. You got the Russias, the Chinas, you got the, the other smaller countries. You got some squads that do, just generally global stuff. I don't know if like the Cubans popped up and did something, like it's not a big threat, but maybe they do. So maybe you got them, right? So you've got all these different squads doing all their stuff. And of those 100 to 150 agents, you figure on average, people have between 8 and 12 cases. So you could probably figure an average of 10. So you've got 1,000 to 1,500 cases. You want to guess how many cases of that 1,000 to 1,500, that bucket, how many of them required daily updates when they did the survey of all the cases being worked by the Washington field office?
How many?
Take a guess.
Half? I don't know. 2?
2.
Jeez.
So the old joke used to be like this. Somebody would come in and they'd be like, oh man, this is really serious. Like, this is a big deal. This is yeah, we really got to get on this. Look, it's Friday afternoon. It's 3:30. So like, we'll deal with this first thing on Monday. I mean, after we have coffee and BS for an hour, like we're definitely going to get right on this thing. And that's kind of the sense of urgency for almost everything that goes on in the counterintelligence space, because it's very slow moving. It's very dragging, and it's for the purposes of information. It's the only way it was ever described to me. There are certain cases that are not like that, things like espionage, but those are few and far between. So generally speaking, like a lot of this stuff is just, it's so tedious, and there's no reason why anybody with a badge and a gun should be working it. There's no upside. You could have the people with a badge and a gun, on loan every once in a while, like, hey, will you go interview this person? This is a thing that they're doing. And you'd go, oh yeah, sure. Like, yeah. They don't need to be sitting in an office carrying a gun, like qualifying, with a weapon on a regular basis in order to sit and, click away on a computer screen. It's really a waste of what, agents are capable of doing. I guess it keeps them out of other trouble. But the problem is a lot of it is infringement, because you're taking people that are criminal investigators. That's why you sign up to do that. You're looking for bad guys. And now you're just looking at guys and you're trying to figure out if they're bad. And that's bizarre. Leads to some fun stories, leads to some really, goofy stuff. But just because the population set that you're working with, especially when you're dealing with like foreign nationals and they have different customs. One of my buddies, one of the funniest stories was we had two guys. They're really like super athletes, super stud type dudes. One of them played lacrosse in college. The other played baseball, almost got drafted, almost became a major leaguer, but got injured kind of deal. So they're both like physical specimens. They're big studs. And they go out on this interview and they go interview some lady. And I don't know if she was like Malaysian or if she was Thai. She was some Asian descent, but I can't remember what it was, but she wasn't Chinese, but it was some, connection to that. And she showed up and apparently she was like very big breasted and wearing like this silk robe with nothing underneath it. And she's talking to the guy, but she was in her 60s. So the guys are kind of like, what do we even do here? Like she wouldn't put any clothes on. And she didn't speak English very well. So she's having this broken English with these two stud guys at the door who are wearing suits. It's just like, okay.
She was ready for them, man. She knew they were studs.
And then they came back. I can't remember what her name was, but the guys would always throw that around. They'd be like, oh, you don't want to have another one of the whatever name, Mimis or whatever. It's like, yeah. So those are funny. But at the end of the day, it's like, if that's what's breaking up the monotony, it's not like it's action. It's not what people think of FBI agents doing. It's not why you sign up to go be an FBI agent. At least I didn't. I thought we were actually going to go and try and run down bad guys. And so the one chance that I got to do that, I was working on an Indian reservation and that was great. I got to put on my cowboy boots, put on my hat and went to work. In fact, my Stetson's sitting over here on the corner right now. And it's like, I worked on an Indian reservation 100 miles away from my office. I had to drive 100 miles to get to work when it was something was going on. Somebody would die or there'd be a sexual assault or whatever it was. And I only got to do that for a couple of months. And then this COVID stuff shut me down. And it's like, man, I felt like that was what I was supposed to be doing. It was great. You go out there and do interviews. We did manhunts. I had days where I'd go out and we did a manhunt. And I'm dropping off, business cards somewhere. And then I turn around and drive home. And then a couple hours later, somebody commits suicide and I got to drive out and look at a body. And you go, that's cool. It's an interesting day, right? I drove 500 miles, between all the things, but it's what you sign up to do. It's like, you're the guy who shows up, you're the detective. You got to go look into it and see what's happening and talk to families, get witness statements, do all the things, examine a body, talk to the coroner, send it off for an autopsy or not, whatever, it's just, that was the stuff that I thought I was going to be doing. And when I got to do it, then it was very, very short. So it's kind of a shame.
Yeah. COVID ruined a lot of things for a lot of people.
That's a really, really nice way of saying that for sure. Yeah. There's a lot of evil in this world. And I think a lot of it was revealed when that stuff started coming out too. So.
Yeah. So another thing that I want to ask you about is the FBI kind of got put on everybody's radar a little bit more in the past couple of years when it came out that they're targeting parents at school board meetings. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So that's exactly what I saw was going on. And like I said, it was my first whistleblowing activity, and it's what I exposed. There was one other person in the FBI that gave that information. They both ended up in Jim Jordan's hands. It was the same letter. It was the same email. And once that happened, it's been a collision course and it's just been a nightmare for Bureau PR because they can't get ahead of it because they're doing things that are wrong. That's the thing. It's like, there was a briefing that came out and so people should kind of understand. I've gotten involved in a whole bunch of trouble. Good trouble, if you will, or whatever it is the leftists like to say. I've specifically gone out and sought to be in trouble because that was the first of many things that I exposed. I exposed a sheet of symbols. It was called the Militia Violent Extremist Symbols Guide, and it had things like the Betsy Ross flag, which you see behind me, which is actually sort of my favorite. The Gadsden 1835 battle flag, the cannon, the come and take it, right?
That's
Sorry,
usually what I have behind me, but I
not the
hadn't
Gads.
hung it
What
right
did I
back
say?
up.
So Gonzalez battle flag, the Gadsden flag, which is the don't tread on me, and all these other
Mhm.
kind of things, and a number of things where they actually badmouth someone like Mike Glover, who I think is great. Mike Glover's a retired special forces guy, and he owns Fieldcraft Survival. And so they did all this stuff. They put it on the sheet, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, "This is wrong." So I sent that off, and Ted Cruz famously got up in front of Chris Wray, and took his boot off, and he's got the cannon on the back of it that says "Come and take it." And he's like, "I'm going to self-report as a potential violent extremist, whatever." And so we did that, and there was some other stuff that I did that was less interesting. The one that's actually getting the most traction right now, there's actually two. One of them is because the FBI started looking into Catholics in the Richmond field office. So I exposed that. I actually wrote the article that exposed it and did the analysis on the document. And then we just published the documents at Uncover DC, which is a website run by Tracy Beans, who's become a friend. And, she's like, put the source documents out there. People can go look at it. They don't even have to call you if they don't want to. And if they want to quote you, they can quote your article, and I'll put it on the website. So we did. And then the last thing is that we've been kind of exposing that the FBI director has been misusing the jet. So there's a jet. It's a Gulfstream. It's a 550. It's a $60 million aircraft, brand new. And it was bought to be able to move counterterrorism resources around so that people can go pick up evidence. And I got friends on the evidence teams that have had to wait because people like Chris Wray or Jim Comey or Andy McCabe, when he was the acting director, when these guys were, on personal travel. And that seems absurd because the whole thing was bought and paid for by the American taxpayers, not to fly the director around. Who cares about that guy? Like, what does he do? He's not investigating anything. He's just pops up and, says silly things. But you got a guy that's running the FBI right now that made $9.8 million or $9.2 million the year before he took over as FBI director. And now he makes $200,000. So he feels entitled to a jet, I guess. I don't know. It's gross. It's crazy. So you expose that stuff. It's kind of banal. It's not very fun. It's not sexy, but that's how people get taken down in government, is by abusing resources like that. So, hopefully some of this stuff is going to start having effect. Obviously, it's exposed a lot of people's understanding now, and they see a lot more about what the Bureau is doing. And, people on the right are looking at them like the enemy. Some people that are smart on the left are doing the same thing because, the FBI is not exclusive to one political party. They're more than happy to screw up things. And they're putting sources into BLM in Colorado that were totally free speech, and they were trying to manufacture terrorist cases on them. So they've been doing that to people on the left for a very long time too. Just crazy.
So yeah. So why specifically do you think all of a sudden it was turned against parents at school board meetings and Catholic churches?
Well, that's a long way down the walkway. I think what happened, and I had an interview on the podcast that I do with a guy named George Hill. George Hill had worked for the NSA, and he was an intelligence specialist for the Marine Corps and for the Navy, and then he was an FBI supervisory intelligence analyst. And so George has 26 years in the intelligence sphere. He said something that was really, really poignant to me. It's one of the messages that I keep repreaching it, but I want to give credit where it's due because I didn't come up with this. He said the definition of national security in the United States changed on September 12th, 2001. Okay. And before that time, before September 11th, everybody in America understood when you went and, enlisted in the military like I did, when you went and swore into civil service and you said that you would swear to protect and defend the Constitution, right, from all enemies, foreign and domestic. That was the goal, that you continue the constitutional republic of the United States, that you are defending our way of life. And that changed. And on September 12th of 2001, I was 19 years old at the time. So I remember watching the planes hit the towers and all of that. And the new definition of national security was no American can die at the hands of a terrorist on American soil. And that is a fundamentally different sort of mission set. And a lot of it actually is very similar to what happened during the COVID insanity. The Chinese had this so-called zero COVID policy. And the only way that you can have zero risk of anything, including death by terrorists, is that you have to start welding people into their houses. I mean, once you say that, like, tyranny is not an option, it's the only option. It's the only thing that you're going to get to. But it takes a long time to get there, right? And so I've explained it as mission creep. People who've been in the military understand mission creep. People who've been in law enforcement, you start off with one thing, you do that really well, you work yourself out of a job, you go find more work. That's mission creep. And in the case of national security, I think what happened is this. This is Kyle Seraphin's hypothesis. I think it's pretty strong. So I think what they did is, whether they were the FBI, whether they were the United States military, September 12th, they decided we're going to go get the bad guys where they're at. We sent dudes to Afghanistan. We sent guys to Iraq, which, for better or for worse, people went there and they did the thing that the United States military does, which is break things and hurt feelings big time, right? And they did a really good job of that. And they tied up the what we call international terrorist threat really, really well. So IT, or international terrorism, that's people over there thinking about over there stuff, trying to bring it here. Okay. And we ran out of that in a big way. And so what they started looking at was phase 2 was a thing. This is the first mission creep, was called homegrown violent extremists. You may have heard that term, homegrown violent extremists. Those are people that are living in the United States. They may be US citizens. They may have emigrated here and become naturalized citizens. They may be green card holders, whatever. But they are living domestically, but they associate with some ideology over there. They pick up the ideology. If they're Somalis, they may be interested in being like Al-Shabaab. If they're Arabs, they may pick up like Al-Qaeda. They may pick up ISIS and say, this is my ideology that I'm going to work under. And so they start trying to do ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab stuff domestically in the United States. So we got to go find them, right? And you run out of those pretty quick too, because it turns out once people get here, they generally like living here. It's a pretty good place to be. We got Uber and we got, Netflix and we got Costco, and people, have a good time. So they don't really want to blow up this place. So it's a very small number of people that do that. So now what are you going to do? Now you've run out of foreign terrorism. You've run out of domestic terrorism that's focused on foreign ideologies, but you're already looking inside the United States. So they've started going after now what we call domestic violent extremists, DVEs. So it's, international terrorism, and it's homegrown violent extremists. Now it's domestic violent extremists. And we started off with things that you'll recognize, that we called them racially motivated violent extremists. Those are like your white supremacists. It could be black supremacists or any other supremacists, honestly, but it's just not. It's white supremacists. That's what they go after. So, they run out of white supremacists too, because there's not a lot of people that are actually interested in doing violence on that. Like when you go interview these guys, or you put an undercover in there and they talk to them, they all say the same thing. It's like, oh, well, maybe after I get a job, like maybe I'll do something. It's like, maybe after I meet a girl. It's like, okay, dude. Like, what? You're going to go hold hands with some chick, and then you're going to get married, and you're going to forget all about your being a dummy, and you're probably going to marry a black girl, and then like life is fine and you'll be all right. So a lot of this goes down, right?
That's how it works a lot of the time, doesn't it?
I don't know. I just think it must. Like, I think God has a sense of humor, so I have to imagine that's the case, right? Like you're some idiot racist kid, and you end up like falling in love with somebody who looks nothing like you, and then you wake up and you become a better person. Like hopefully marriage makes people better, right?
Yep.
So end of the day, they're looking for these racially motivated violent extremists. And then they started doing militia violent extremists. And they've been adding this new thing called anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists, which is the whole January 6th workup is a lot of that. And then, they've been doing anti-abortion violent extremists, which when I was a kid in the 90s, there were a couple of people that were bombing abortion clinics, that were shooting at abortion doctors and so on. But I haven't seen that stuff in 20 something years. But apparently that's
that used to be a bigger thing.
It was a thing for sure. It's just not anymore, but they're bringing it back up like it's real, like it's a real problem. And we just don't see it because basically things have been moving towards a sort of a pro-life footing in this country, with the scale back a row, and a lot of different states that are red are basically going like, yeah, we're done with abortion. We're going to cut it back to the point where we can legally or whatever. So, that doesn't exist in the same way. In fact, pro-life people tend to be pretty pro-life. They don't go blow stuff up for the most part unless they're really unhinged. So you don't see a lot of this stuff, but there's a need for it because there's a funding for it. And so that's how we got so sideways. That's why we're looking at Catholics, because the reason that Catholic memo was drafted and what it actually said was, it's truly absurd. They said that there was a high potential for Catholics that were what they called radical traditionalist Catholics, which is to say people who like Latin Mass, that are pre-Vatican II. The Vatican councils met in the 1960s, and they basically made the Catholic Mass move into the vernacular, the language of the area. So if you were in Mexico, it'd be in Spanish. If you're in the United States, it's in English. If you're in Canada, it'd be in Canadian. And I don't know how to speak Canadian. I think you just say I'm sorry a lot and thank you. But end of the day, you've got this sort of this more accessibility of the Catholic Mass that happened after Vatican II. And some people don't like that. A lot of people don't like that. And so they say, look, it was good enough for 2,000 years. I like the Latin Mass. That's what I want to do. And those Latin Mass Catholics apparently are susceptible to being recruited by white supremacists. And you think, well, why is that? And I'm going to tell you why. It's because they don't like abortion. They don't like illegal immigration. And they're not a big fan of so-called LGBTQIA plus rights, which are basically mainline Christian teachings, right?
Yep.
It's essentially everybody who's a Christian that sort of understands what Christianity means. Traditional Christian beliefs all have those common lines. So I don't think they were necessarily going after Catholics per se. I think that the radicals that are writing these kind of doctrines that are very young leftist, the thing about intelligence work is that you get people that are very highly degreed. They spend a bunch of time in school. They've spent all this this long term in education, and so they come out pretty indoctrinated towards leftist thinking. And so even that document referred to like pregnant persons, which, like, I don't know if you've met pregnant persons, like, I'm imagining you have, and they all are women. That's how that works. It's just real straightforward, right? Like it's not that complicated. So pregnant persons was one of the sort of flags that they had on this deal. And end of the day, that's what this guy was saying. And I think that they weren't drawing a line around this little group of Catholics. They were really just saying, like, this is the open door to get into all Christians. And why is that? Because they vote, more of them are conservative than not. And radical traditionalist Catholics are definitely conservative, and they're definitely voting for the right. They're moving towards a, take your pick, a MAGA type crowd, a America First type agenda. And for some reason, that's antithetical to FBI leadership, but it's not antithetical to people who are in the FBI. A lot of people in the FBI are conservative. So that's why it's so weird. People in law enforcement in general, you probably understand that. It's like they are pro-America. They signed up because they believe in this country. They didn't sign up because they believe in all that other crazy stuff we just talked about. But
so if there's a surplus of conservative FBI agents, or, well, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Why are more of them not jumping on this as you have? Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it's a complicated answer too, I think.
I was going to say bandwagon, but it's not a bandwagon, so that was the wrong word for it. But
that's fair.
You know what I'm saying.
So even though I would say that the majority of FBI agents are conservative, they're still the minority within the Bureau. So the Bureau is about 37,000 people. That's how many people work for the FBI, give or take. And agents make up less than 14,000 of that. So, maybe a little bit more than a third, right? I think the numbers are right. That's pretty close. And so, and then probably, let's say 2/3 of those people are conservative. I don't know if that's true, but you're basically looking now at like a quarter of the Bureau. So you're actually outnumbered probably 3-1. That's politically ideology. So you got to keep your mouth shut at work anyway. Every skiff I've ever worked in has always had CNN on it. They all do. I don't know why. They just all do, because that's what the intel people want to watch. Every once in a while, you go into an office that has Fox News on it, but the main screens are all turned to CNN. And then, when you're surrounded in that way, and the management is incentivized, because that's the other real problem. The management is all moving up, and they all seem to be politically on the left, at least the ones that promote high enough, because they're going to keep their mouth shut and they're going to do what they're told. My buddy who produces my podcast is a former FBI agent, 15 years in, and his statement was a GS-15 in the FBI. That's the assistant special agent in charge in most field offices. That's the sort of pay grade that they have. So they are, your brick agent is sort of your frontline worker, and then you've got a supervisor, and then you got an ASAC. And he basically said a GS-15 in the FBI, and probably in the entire federal government, is someone who's never said no to a bad idea, because you got to say yes if you want to promote. So when you think that's probably the nature of things, the types of people that want to promote and the types of people that take those jobs. And the other thing is, it's really hard on families. Promotions usually means you have to move to another area. So you're bouncing around like people do in the military, but you're also coming back really quickly. You're going back and forth to DC over and over and over again, every 18 months to 2 years, in order to kind of progress up the ranks. And to do that, a lot of them are adulterous. The affairs in the FBI would blow your mind. People who have a national security clearance that are sleeping around on their wives and husbands, it's a shocking number of them. And every time I hear about it, it's like, all I do is I ask somebody, like, hey, what kind of agent is this? Well, like, she's, banging this dude, and he went to headquarters, and then he went somewhere else, and then she got her husband to move there, and then she divorced her husband. And I'm like, okay, so a piece of garbage. Thank you. That's all I need to know. It's like just a trash human being. There's tons of them. And it starts in the academy. I think of the 5 or 6 women that were in my academy class, we had sections. There were 4 sections within my class. So in my section, there were 5 or 6 women. And I think 5 of them either left their husband before they showed up, or left their husband while they're at the academy and started having affairs with
Wow.
other people. I mean, it was insane. And like even people that I didn't even know were having affairs, you started having affairs. It's just like I didn't want to talk to any of them. That was my number one thing. It's like I'm married, got a baby on the way. I don't want to talk to any of you. I don't want to be your friends. I don't even want to remember your names. I just came up with nicknames with them, and half of them I don't know their names. I've seen them and I don't know their names. I know they were in my class. I don't know their names anymore because it wasn't important. It was important for me not to remember their names because it was just a lot of just bad, gross behavior. And then you figure they all have national security clearances, right? So how compromised are you when you start having, adultery over your head? When you just betrayed the person that you're supposed to be the most respectful of, right? Or the person that you were supposed to, be the most honest with. Like, who cares about the quote unquote American public? You think they wouldn't sell out the American public? And then, great example, there's a guy named Charlie McGonigal who just got arrested in New
And
York.
that's not even a person. That's an abstract idea.
What's that? Yeah, exactly
the American
right.
people.
Yeah, you don't have to go and like look that person in the eye, like the American people. You don't have to look them in the eye. So that's why you end up with these guys. And so Charlie McGonigal is a really good example. He was the special agent in charge of counterintelligence, probably arguably the most important counterintelligence agent in the entire FBI. It's a toss up between him and whoever's in charge of Washington field office. And he was collecting bags of cash with like $85,000 in it by like random Albanians. Right. He ended up taking in like over $280,000, and he was finally arrested for it. And of course he had a mistress on the side. Of course he did. In fact, I'm going to interview her shortly because she wants to tell her story. And I'm like, I want to hear it. I don't know if you're the villain. I don't know if you're the good guy or the bad guy. I'm interested to know what you knew and when, because that's really interesting, right? He had a whole second apartment that he was maintaining and a whole nother life, which that's actually one of the things they found out about Robert Hansen, who's the famous spy from the 80s, that when they went after Hansen, one of the things that they were looking for was marital infidelity, financial instability, academic cheating. Those were all the big red flags for people that would be willing to, commit espionage against the United States. And they're still getting it, apparently. Like, it's crazy. It's actually crazy.
Well, another thing that I wanted to ask you about is the public and the media's reaction to you. Were they the same? Were they different? What were they?
So media on the right, the conservative media in general has been great. And it's funny because I'm not a Republican. I've been an independent my entire life with one exception. I actually registered as a Republican in New Mexico for a few months in order to vote in the primaries because I wanted to make sure that my the congresswoman that I was actually doing my whistleblower disclosures to stuck around, and she ended up getting voted out by 1,200 votes or something. It's kind of a shame, but end of the day, I've never seen this as a political issue, and yet there've been hit pieces written about me in the New York Times. Sometimes they got my name wrong. Sometimes they got my story wrong. And they put my story with a guy named Steve Friend's story, who's my buddy now. I've had this MSNBC reporter, I think he's MSNBC, whatever his name is, Ryan J. Riley, has written some, nasty things, was trying to do some gotchas and he wrote them, and I go read it and I go like, no, I said all those things. Yeah, I stand behind them, idiot. Like that's why I said them. Like, piss off. You're not a strong thinker, apparently. You don't want to get in a toe-to-toe with me when it comes to things like this. But, and we've done it back and forth on Twitter a couple times too. And so, it's interesting. It's just the reception has been totally partisan, totally right down the partisan lines. People like Seb Gorka, who used to work under President Trump, has been great. Dan Bongino, was on Fox, great. Jesse Waters on Fox, great. Jesse Kelly, who's on First Network, great. And then some of the more smaller independent journalists have been really, really fantastic. People like Tracy Beans, people like Emerald Robinson, Kim Iverson. I keep a running contact with those and their producers. And they're, anytime I want to share something, they'll do it. People at Daily Wire have been really good. I got people at American Greatness, Washington Times. It's just all Washington Post, or rather New York Post. Not Washington Post, New York Post. And Miranda Devine's been really cool too. She, answers text messages and lets me know things. And if I have a question, she'll tell me something. If I have an idea, I'll tell her and she'll run with it if it makes sense. So totally right down the partisan line though. I mean, it's literally a left and right if I'm either a villain or not. And then, then my colleagues have been kind of terrified because you just look over and they just go like, I don't want anything to happen. I don't want to be part of that at all. Because nobody signed up.
They don't want any guilt by association.
No, and I've had some of the funniest stuff is like, so one of the gals that was on my first squad, because we burned a lot of people in the Bureau that needed to be burned. And I'm more than happy to say names, as you've seen. I don't mind saying their names. Like, they work for the American taxpayer. So, they're not secret agents, even though that was the joke I used to tell people. They'd say, what's your job? And I go, oh, I'm a secret agent for the FBI. And people would go, I think it's a special agent. And then I was like, well, everything I write says secret on it. So I'm pretty sure I'm a secret agent. It's so stupid. But that was kind of the thing. And so anyway, one of my colleagues from my first squad, where I was really miserable, we still keep in touch, and she's really funny, and we don't agree on a whole bunch of stuff, but we've been to weddings together, and like, I know her husband, and she's met my kids. So what, are we not going to talk? Of course we are. And so somebody came up to her and said, hey, you should stay away from Seraphin. Like, don't talk to him. And she said, well, I'm not going to do that. Good on her. She's like, we're friends, so you can't tell me to do that. And we don't talk about work all that much, other than when we just kind of badmouth, like, sort of the crappiness that goes on. And it's really easy, because that's what all FBI employees do when they get together. They just talk about how awful the FBI is. It's nonstop. It's the number one thing that happens. You get two FBI agents together in a beer, and it's just game on. And every supervisor is the worst, which many of them are bad, and then here's the worst, partner story that we've had. And here's the worst bureaucratic garbage that I've done. And, here's something that I was trying to get done, but I couldn't get through because the paperwork was stupid and somebody didn't have the guts to actually do their job. And there's a ton of that. So I just have made some of it public, which they don't really like. I like it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I have one final question for you, Kyle. Can the FBI be saved, in your opinion, or are you of the mindset that it needs to be abolished?
So I don't think it can be saved. I think that it's destroyed its reputation with people. And I think it's generations away from it being recovered in that way. So I don't think that it should stick around, but that's not going to, I don't think they're going to get rid of it, though. That's the other problem, right? So
Sure.
What I think is sort of irrelevant. I'm an abolitionist on it. There's other people that say the same thing. Guys like, Dan Bongino, I talk to him fairly frequently. I'm on his radio show, and it's like, we are 100% in line on that, because we know how rotted it is. You'd have to get rid of the entire management culture. But moreover, the real danger is that, like so many things that were exposed in 2020 after the COVID chaos, what we saw is that a lot of people know what the right answer is, and they're not willing to do it. A lot of people said, I'll do that, when they should have said, no way. And that includes a supervisor of mine who said, look, I think you're probably in the right, but I have a mortgage and I have an alimony, and I can't do what you're doing. And that's unacceptable.
Yeah. So, debt is a powerful motivator.
Debt and just financial inability to, like, look, I went April to April with no paycheck. Well, June to April, I went 10 months without a paycheck, almost a year, right? I sold my house. I moved my family into my folks' house for 7 months, and maybe more, maybe 8. Was it 8 months, 7 months, 8 months? I don't know, whatever it was. It was awful. And not because my folks aren't great people, but because it's terrible to take a family of 5 and put them into 2 bedrooms that are, not your house, not your space, not your kitchen, not your refrigerator, not your driveway. And you're taking up space in somebody else, and you're imposing on them, and they're trying to do the best they can. So, we did that voluntarily because it was the right thing to do, because of what my wife and I determined was the right move, and we just stuck by our guns. Very few people are willing to do that. Most people aren't going to turn over their house. Like, that's where they live. But for me, it was never about that. It was always like, well, this job is going to go away, and then I'm not going to give up. I had multiple job offers, but all those job offers would have required me to stop talking. And at the end of those offers, at the end of even being offered them, and it would have been close enough to replace my salary that we would have barely noticed anything. We would not have been uncomfortable. And, it's like, I had conversations with the hiring, managers and stuff like that. And one was a local sheriff who was a former FBI agent. And he just goes, I don't think you should take this job. I think you got to keep doing what you're doing. And, that's a wild thing. So for months, I just kept turning it down. And when that happens, it makes me think that I should have never been in this situation. What they should have said is, you're right, there's some problems. Like, first of all, they came after me for being a whistleblower, and they came after everybody for not getting the COVID shots. They just are withdrawing it. It's the 6th today. So in 5 days, the Biden mandate is going to expire, and it will no longer be required. They wanted a permanent change in your health status for a temporary period of time to have that job. That's fully crazy. And we got injunctions in the courts saying that they couldn't do it, and they kept pushing it anyway. So that tells me that the people that are running the FBI are very, very much on the board of doing things that are illegal, immoral, or unethical. And I've made arguments that, we weren't treated like the Jews were in the Holocaust, not by a long shot, obviously. But they are acting like what the Nazis did. They are acting very much like what the Nazis did during the run up to World War II, which is to say that they were following orders when they should not have been. And so I don't think you can keep a intelligence agency such as it is with law enforcement authorities. I think it's incredibly dangerous. That's secret police stuff. So until they figure out how to get rid of the domestic intelligence mission, the FBI is just a massive danger to everybody. And definitely for my family. Like, I'm not opening the door for those guys at all. It's not good.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's a sad state for us to be in. But it is, I think that is the case. And hopefully, some people in Congress step up and do what needs to be done and start pulling some funding and asking the hard questions.
Well, Kyle, I've had a amazing time listening to your story, and I think it's so important to get that story out there. So what's next for you?
So I do a podcast 3 days a week. People can see it live on Rumble. It shows up at 9:30 Eastern time, 8:30 Texas America time. And that's actually paying my bills right now, which is kind of incredible. And let's see, what else I'm doing Timcast. I'll be on Timcast on Monday night coming up in a couple of days. So that'll be an interesting little thing. I'll probably see some surveillance on me when I jump on the plane, because I'm pretty sure I saw it the last time I got on the plane. But if they want to let me go, that'd be okay too. If they tell me who they are, I'll give them a high five and I won't run away from them, because I don't care. I got nothing to hide on that. But yeah, we'll do it, Tim. Then like I said, people can find me. They can find me on Twitter, and I'm going to keep activist activities. I mean, I'm just going to keep exposing. I never know when another one of these stories is going to drop, but I don't shy away from it. People know how to find me. People that work for the FBI know how to find me. And some of them seek me out, and they look to expose stuff. One of the craziest things was we had somebody come to us and say basically that, that they weren't being allowed to do their job in Minneapolis. And this is, task force officers that are working on a federal task force trying to get indictments against the Bloods, like the street gang that was running George Floyd Square in Minneapolis, which is like 38th in Chicago. And so we reported on it. I reported on it. I put it out. I was on Bongino's national radio show. I made it on his podcast again, and I've talked about it. And I did had a buddy drive through there and film a bunch of stuff, and we put it out on my podcast. And sure enough, within a week of us exposing this stuff, DOJ gave the go ahead, and they went out there and got the indictments they needed to get. So some of the stuff actually makes a tangible bit of difference. I'm here for it. I mean, that's my gig right now. I'm 100% all in, pro America, anti FBI. We'll see where that leads us.
That's awesome. Well, everybody go follow Kyle. Kind of mix my words there. Everybody go follow Kyle on Twitter and give his podcast a listen to. And guys, if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, I would appreciate a sub on that. Have a good week. Thanks, Kyle.
Hey, thanks, Casey. I enjoyed it.